we are coming off consecutive weeks of national elections for the French Parliament, and the results were quite surprising. We saw a victory for the left-leaning coalition in the country and a surprising defeat for the far right.
Yeah.
Do you want to go over how this went down?
Yeah, sure. So when we look back to the European parliamentary elections that happened about a month ago, the far right, the National Rally, won huge majorities in France, massive majorities. They won almost the most amount of votes in almost all the constituencies across the country, except for like Paris and the suburbs of Paris. And so the right wing was in a very, very strong position. And out of nowhere, Macron comes out and he calls for a snap election to the parliament. And what that means is he wants to, dissolve parliament and have a fresh new election. And pundits were shocked because Macron's party was just decimated. The National Rally won 34% of the vote in the European parliamentary elections.
Yeah.
And Macron's party, the Renaissance Party, got 14%.
We talked about this at the time, and we talked about how this was going to be a massive gamble for Macron.
And I think I said, we were discussing about the gamble, and it was all going to be about how Macron could unify and ally with the left parties and the left coalition. Because in response to this election getting called, the left organized very, very quickly. The Greens, the Communists, the Socialist Party, and the French Unbound, led by Georges Mélenchon, they all united very quickly into the new Popular Front. And this new Popular Front was much less radical than previous left-wing coalitions in the past.
Okay.
It was less radical than the 2020 French left-wing coalition called NUPES. So it was less radical than that, and they were saying, let's combine with this force and we can defeat the National Rally, and they very much framed the election as fighting back against fascism. Now, after the first round, it did not look like they were going to succeed. The National Rally put up huge numbers across the country in the first round, and it was projected that in the second round, they would be able to capture a majority of seats or a few seats short of the majority. Now, this is a huge rise for the National Rally because they have gone from 8 seats to 16 seats to 40-something seats, and now they were ready to go up all the way to like 289 to reach the majority. That was within striking distance in that second round.
So what did the opposition do to stop them?
So after the first round went out, Mélenchon was the first guy to come out and speak, which was notable because he's like the proto-leader of this left-wing coalition. You ask the Socialist Party, Mélenchon is not the leader, but it is what it is. Mélenchon gets up there and he says right away, he says, anyone who is in the left-wing coalition needs to drop out and endorse the Macronist candidate going up against the far right.
Wow.
He says it right away, like third sentence out of his speech. And I'm listening to this at the taco joint around the corner from my apartment. And I'm like, oh, thank God. This is exactly what needs to happen. And when we talked about the coming of this election, we talked about the gamble. I said the only way that this gamble would be able to pay off is if that there was a center left and left-wing alliance to counter the far right. Because I don't want to go into the whole intricacies of how French elections are done because it could take too long. But they have a runoff system. So say you have like 10 candidates, okay, in a district, that's the first round. And then you go to the second round if you get over 12.5%. So there are a lot of candidates, or there is a lot of districts where multiple candidates got over the 12.5% figure.
Okay.
So in those areas where it was a left-winger, a Macronist, and then a right-winger, and the left-winger came in third, he dropped out and endorsed the Macronist. And then the ensemble guy, the Macronist guys come out, and they say the exact same thing. They say, when we're in third place, we're going to drop out, we're going to endorse the left-wing coalition.
So I assume then, more often than not, the new front part, or the Popular Front, they got second place more often than the Macron group, because then they ended up winning the most seats.
Exactly. That's exactly right. The left-wing party ended up being in second more often, but there was really strict, really impressive voter behavior that I want to call out. There were some districts where it was like 30% National Rally, it was like 45% National Rally, and then like 30% communist and then like 15% Macronist. And
Okay.
all of the Macronists voted for the communist, and the communist won that seat against the far righter.
Okay.
And so that was happening across the country.
Yeah.
And that led to the far right losing, not losing seats, but not gaining as much as was projected. And so the Popular Front ended up with 180 seats, the Ensemble, the Macronists, 159, and the far right down at 140.
So I want to compare this to American politics.
Yeah.
Because a lot of the time, commentators will talk about an anti-MAGA majority
Right.
that exists in this country, and how we can certainly beat fascism if a coalition of an anti-MAGA majority continues to band together and really turn out and vote them down. However, Trump has already won in 2016.
Right.
We now are in a position where we both think he has a very good chance of winning again in 2024. Is there anything you think we can take away from this voting strategy?
Well, there's nothing that we can take away because you and I are a part of the anti-MAGA coalition.
Okay.
There is nothing that this result can inform us or inform our behavior. But I will say that there is center-right people in this country who are maybe pro-business and think that, I can put up with a little bit of fashy stuff
Yeah.
as long as I get my tax cuts.
Yeah.
And I want to show you, and this result should show you, that the rest of the world and the other business leaders don't agree with that. They do not agree with your analysis.
Yeah.
Because a right-wing government is an unstable government.
Okay.
And that instability is going to damage our ability to be an international player in the market. It's going to damage your ability to have an understanding and a consistent regulatory state to deal with. There are problems that you're going to have as a business leader dealing with a far right winger, less so than a center left coalition.
Okay. I want to posit two other takeaways that I have. First of all, we note from specifically anti-Israel protests, for example, that there is fracturing on the left in the U.S. voter base a lot. There's been some concern from media figures that kind of fracturing could lose Biden the election. I feel like this is a great message to anyone who might think of sitting out the election or not voting Biden or voting third party, that your voting power is necessary in full force
Absolutely.
to vote down the fascist.
Think about all the center voters in that district that I talked about that voted for a communist just to beat Le Pen.
Exactly.
And think about all the communists across France that voted for a Macronist just to stop Le Pen.
Now, sorry,
that's good.
Just the second take that I want to put in here is we're still 4 months out from the American election. Any kind of fracturing or moving away from Biden that we might consider not only from far left, like young far left people who hate Israel, but also from center right people who we perceive as not that scared of the fascists, we haven't seen the election results. It's possible that our anti-MAGA majority, especially post a Trump term that already happened, could be stronger than we expect.
Right.
It's just an idea.
That is possible.
Yes.
And let's not get too far into American politics in this segment.
No.
But the last thing I'll say on that topic is there is definitely a strong anti-MAGA majority. I don't know what concerns me is I don't know how much of it is there. It seems to me that France has a very clear anti-Le Pen majority.
Okay.
And I'm not totally convinced that there is an anti-MAGA majority big enough to defeat Trump the way that Le Pen was squashed here.
Okay.
But I want to talk about how you want to add on to that?
No, I was gonna transition to another point here. The results here created no majority.
Correct.
In the French Parliament.
Correct.
What happens next? How do they govern?
So let's talk about right now. I want to talk about what the left is calling for and how the left is planning on dealing with this, because this is going to answer your question.
Okay.
So the left is the biggest party, which means that historically the president should give them the first opportunity to form a government.
And to choose a prime minister.
Because
the president is the leader of international affairs and the prime minister is the leader of domestic affairs.
That's right. Now, Mélenchon comes out after the second round, and he says that he is reluctant to compromise on any part of the party program to gain governing power.
And I just want to be clear: was Mélenchon the leader? He's the leader of the communists.
He is the leader of the French Unbound Party, not the leader of the
furthest left.
The
party.
Second furthest left.
So the communists are the furthest.
The communists are the furthest.
Okay.
Then there's the French Unbound, and the French Unbound is the largest partner in this left-wing coalition.
Okay, so that's why I wanted to confirm
it's
Mélenchon is the leader of this whole left-wing coalition.
But
then
you ask the president, you ask the leader of the Socialist Party that, he would say no. So it's not really true that he's the leader.
They haven't quite agreed on it.
There is no leader. They have all said that there's no leader.
Okay.
They have explicitly said that they have not picked a prime minister yet.
Okay.
But I will say Mélenchon will not be the prime minister. He is too much of a divisive figure. The Greens have all but ruled him out. The Socialist Party does not want to do it.
Okay.
I think the prime minister will come from the Socialist Party, a center left. But and that will also help. Having a socialist prime minister will also help pick off some left-leaning Macronists in the parliament to support the government.
Okay.
But Mélenchon is not. He is indicating that he does not want to compromise the party platform. He has specific and serious policy disagreements with Macron, and he is right to say that the left-wing party got a lot of momentum because of their program. It was a very inspiring program, an ambitious program that inspired a lot of young people out to vote, and that's something we have to talk about. The voter turnout was 67.1% in the second round. That's the highest since 1997. There was some serious motivation to go out and vote against the right for this left-wing movement. There's momentum for that. So Mélenchon is reluctant to give power to Macron quickly, but let them haggle over the details. Of course, he has to come out saying and putting his hardest foot forward right away. He's not going to concede on any policy positions the day of the election.
So it's just a negotiating tactic.
It needs to marinate. But what does the left want to do? I think it's worth going into that. What the left wants to do. So one thing that they're pushing for.
Sorry, before we transition. So you're not really worried about them figuring out how to form a coalition government? Because one thing that I read about after this is France has never had this situation. They've never had a parliament that didn't have a majority since in modern France, since post-war, basically since the 50s.
I don't know if that's right.
That's what I've read.
Okay, so the Fifth Republic has never had to have a coalition government.
Exactly. So this is something that they're really not used to, and everything that I've read said that it will be difficult. And there, like you're saying, and like Mélenchon was saying, there are real policy differences between
Macron and the left have serious policy differences, and it's going to be hard to massage them into some workable framework.
Yeah, I've seen estimates that it will take months to actually form a government.
And it may. And you know what? Then I want to transition to this then. I want to talk about how the right wing reacted to this election.
Yeah.
Because the right wing was expected to win, and they were ready to win. But right after the results came in, they started talking about how the election was basically rigged. They discussed how that it was gamesmanship with the left and the center, and that they're voting in cooperation with each other, even though they have two different platforms, actually goes against the nature of the French system. And then they talked about the danger of having a divided government, and they talked about the danger that France is in, and that how France is actually in a state of crisis and needs a unified government controlled by one party at this moment. And so what scares me is if the left and the Macronists can't form a governing coalition about common sense Republican values, small r Republican values, will this prove the right wingers right? The French people cannot prove that the right is the only solidified large enough bloc to properly be a governing majority.
Yeah.
And so the left and the center have to get something worked out here. Otherwise, the right is going to capitalize on this, point at the left wing and the center and say, those guys destroyed the country. They can't be trusted. They can't get their stuff together. We can. We will whip this country into shape. We need one party control, and we are that one party.
That's my biggest fear. My biggest fear is they don't agree on anything. You have a government that is basically non-functional, although continues to be democratic and not explicitly Islamophobic, for example. So they avoid those far-right values. But in the meantime, all of the quote-unquote serious people who are interested in the government making actual reforms to help the country are disappointed by what they get. And if that happens, then I do worry about the far-right, their position in future elections, and being able to take a lot more power from there.
And so with what the left, I think, is trying to do is pose an alternative reality to what the right is offering. Because the Macronists and the center is almost basically saying, we're going to sail our boat down this river and we're going to go straight. And we're going to keep on the projections we're on. We're going to keep doing what we're doing. They're not really vying for any type of change, where the right wing wants to shake the boat. And shaking the boat is very popular when you think that the boat isn't going the right direction. And so the left wing is saying, we can steer the boat a different way too. And we don't have to go down the way of Islamophobia and blaming everything on immigrants. We have a different path. And the left's path is the following. They want to put a 90% tax rate on annual income over 400,000 euros. They want to slash the retirement age from 64 to 60. They want a 14% increase in the minimum wage. They want to bring back wealth and exit taxes. This is something that Macron actually got rid of in 2018. And so this large, and then they also want to obviously beef up investment into infrastructure and green energy stuff. So this is a huge movement of raising money to then eventually improve social welfare in the country. And so what their thought process is, if we can improve the social welfare, the Islamophobia and the racism and the right-wingers will stop. The wind will be taken out of their sails. If we can give these people a better standard of living without pointing and blaming it on a brown person, then maybe we can avoid the fascist takeover in the next 5 years.
To me, that sounds like a very valid idea. It sounds like a good idea. A lot of salience. Do you agree?
Do I agree with what?
That the fact that their progressive platform could actually take the wind out of the sails of the RN.
I totally agree. I do genuinely agree. I think one of the reasons that so many people were pulled from the brinks of radicalism during the New Deal under FDR was because FDR gave them a job. FDR gave them a job. FDR gave them a paycheck. FDR connected his house to electricity. And so I think if those things can be done, I think that could people away from the issue.
And I think it's the combination of like, yes, help me in my own small day-to-day life, but also give me a vision.
Give me a vision.
Right? And
Make me believe in something bigger than me.
Yes, and sailing down the same center path is never a vision. I don't think France is not the worst place in the world to live as it is right now, but because of the media environment that we have and a ton of other things, you're still going to have a ton of unhappy, discontent people who are still going to benefit enormously from being shown a vision of progress and betterment.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And that's what the left is offering. So I hope the Macronists and the left can form a coalition that gives the French people that vision that counteracts the racist vision of the far right.